The Nebula Awards are voted on by writers, the people who shape science fiction and fantasy itself. I've read every Nebula Award-winning book for Best Novel from the 1960s, so which ones still hold up and which ones are better left in the past? The 1965 winner was Dune by Frank Herbert. This is one of the most famous sci-fi books ever written. There's countless videos on this book, so I'm not going to linger on it too long, but I always recommend it because of how huge its influence on pop culture has been. It still holds up, and it's also one of those books that a lot of people have read, so you'll have no trouble finding others to talk about it with. There were two winners for 1966. We're going to start with Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. The story actually started as a Hugo Award-winning novelette before being expanded into a full novel. It follows Charlie Gordon, a man with a very low IQ who undergoes an experimental surgery that rapidly increases his intelligence. He goes from a dim-witted individual to a genius. The story is told through Charlie's progress reports, which basically function as chapters. Early on, they're filled with spelling errors and very simple language, but as his intelligence grows, the writing becomes a bit more complex. Now, I did like this concept, but I never really felt like Charlie was either a complete dimwit or a true genius because of the prose. The writing in the progress reports doesn't quite reach either extreme, and I don't think that's a limitation on Keyes' writing ability. It felt more like a deliberate choice to keep the book more accessible. This is a book that can be read by middle schoolers and up, so I think Keyes chose to keep the prose relatively simple, even if it meant not fully capturing the extremes of Charlie's intelligence. Where the novel really shines is in its focus on emotional intelligence. Keyes does a great job of showing how Charlie's understanding of himself and others evolves over time. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage emotions both in yourself and in others. And as Charlie changes, he becomes increasingly aware of how people see him and how he sees himself. Watching that development is easily the most powerful part of the book. The book definitely shows its age. I wouldn't say in a bad way. It was written in the 1960s, and it reflects how people with mental disabilities were often treated at that time. They were frequently neglected, dehumanized, or placed in harsh institutional settings. At its core is about empathy, about how we treat other people. It highlights the importance of dignity and respect, regardless of someone's abilities. I enjoyed the book, and I definitely recommend it. If you've already read it and want something with a very similar core premise, but taken in a completely different direction, I recommend Camp Concentration by Thomas Disch. It has the same premise, but it goes in a more dark and twisted direction. Between the two, I think Flowers for Algernon is more valuable because of its focus on empathy, but Disch's novel is definitely the more brutal and, in my opinion, the more fun read. The other winner for 1966 was Babel 17 by Samuel Delany. There's a space war going on, but it's unclear who the enemy is, where they are, or even what they want. The story follows Rydra Wong, a poet and a linguist brought in by the military to decode mysterious messages being used by the enemy. She assembles a crew and sets out into space to uncover the secrets behind these messages, only to discover that the messages aren't coded. They're just messages in a completely new language. As Rite learns more about this unique language, it begins to reshape how she sees the world. I'll start with the characters, then the prose, and finally how the book is aged. The way Rydra assembles her crew feels distinctly sci-fi. Many of them have augmented bodies, and each one fills a highly specialized role needed to operate a spaceship. It's creative, fun, and a little confusing to read about. But once the crew is established, the character development becomes more of an afterthought. The relationships feel shallow and somewhat rushed. Rita gathers this team, and shortly after, they're already ride or die for her, as if they've known each other for years rather than just coming together. In terms of prose, Delany is both an impressive writer and a challenging one. I found myself getting a bit lost while reading the book. There are stretches where everything flows clearly, followed by a few pages you might have to stumble through before things open up again. The best way I can describe it is like going on a run with a friend who's in much better shape. They'll often pull ahead a bit, but they always slow down once they realize they've gotten too far ahead. The book is challenging in parts, but most people should be able to finish it and understand it if they stick with it. As for how the book is aged, I think it's aged kind of poorly, but in a somewhat unlucky way. The central idea it explores is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. I could be mispronouncing that, but it's a linguistic theory that the language we use influences how we think and perceive the world. The theory, however, isn't as strongly supported today as it once was. A common example used to illustrate this is that some languages have multiple words for snow, but snow is still snow. Like, people aren't perceiving a fundamentally different reality of snow just because they use different words for it. The real difference is that having specific terms for things like powdery, icy, or packed snow allows for faster, more precise communication. So language doesn't change what we can perceive, but it can influence how easily we describe things or categorize them. The book also shows its age in terms of tech. Like a lot of older sci-fi, it doesn't anticipate how modern tech consolidates multiple functions into one device. Think of a phone. It can act as a calculator, camera, flashlight, and far more. So the book can feel a bit jarring because you're reading about spaceships that are capable of interplanetary travel, but tape recorders and punch cards are still the norm and haven't been wrapped up or consolidated into another device. Ultimately, the novel is fascinating because it pushes a linguistic hypothesis to its logical extreme, but it doesn't really fully hold up today just given how the hypothesis has evolved. It's still an impressive work, especially considering Delaney was only 23 when he wrote it. 1967, The Einstein Intersection by Samuel Delany won. The story is set in a distant post-apocalyptic future where society is fractured into tribes and membership is often determined by genetic viability. Our main character, Lalobi, sets off on a journey to avenge his wife's death, only to discover that she may still be alive. That serves as the main premise for at least the first half of the novel. The second half largely went over my head for a variety of reasons. As you're reading, it becomes clear there's much more happening beneath the surface. The story is essentially a reimagining of the Greek myth of Orpheus, filtered through a 1960s lens and layered with symbolism, references, and shifting meaning. Combined with Delaney's disjointed, almost poetry-like prose, it becomes a pretty dense and challenging read. But there are really three barriers to fully understand what's going on. First, you need to know the myth of Orpheus. Second, you need to know a decent amount of 1960s pop culture. Like, the most obvious reference I caught was about Elvis Presley, and there was a few others I caught, but I probably missed like the majority of them. And then finally, you have to keep up with Delaney's prose, which can shift from crystal clear and readable to dense and abstract within a paragraph. If Babel 17 is like trying to keep up with a friend who's running but will always be in sight, the Einstein intersection is like running with a friend who cuts through the neighborhood, loops around halfway, and somehow rejoins you before you've even figured out where they went. As for whether it's held up, I honestly don't know. I wasn't always sure what was going on for a good amount of the book, but I can see why it won the Nebula. Authors would probably have a better time catching a lot of the references compared to just the average reader. For a modern audience, I don't think it's a book that most people would enjoy. Fully appreciating it would require working through layers of mythology, cultural references, and prose complexity. Doing that takes a fair amount of effort and background knowledge that most readers either won't have or they won't want to invest in just for this book. 1968, Rite of Passage by Alexei Panshin. This is a coming-of-age story. The protagonist is a young girl named Mia who grows up on a massive, self-sustaining spaceship centuries after humanity destroyed Earth. When Mia comes of age, she must undergo a formal survival test called a trial, where she and other adolescents are sent to a harsh, colonized planet and must survive for a set period of time. The story is told entirely from Mia's perspective, and the writing reflects that. She's a young girl, so she is full of questions, and through her inquisitive viewpoint, you gradually learn more about the culture aboard the ship. This works well and feels organic when you're learning about the world at large, but at times Mia explains very basic things, like soccer, in an overly simple, incomplete way that can feel a bit annoying. That said, this is a juvenile fiction, so I'm not the target demographic. It's a coming-of-age story in which Mia begins to question the values she has inherited. She has been told that the people on the colonized planets are barbarians and not truly civilized, yet her own society restricts the information to these barbarians and justifies it as necessary for trade and survival. Mia's interactions through the book reveal a more complicated picture. Cultures have different pros and cons. Some cultures are more progressive in one way and more regressive in another. The book highlights how typically a powerful, technologically advanced group will often use the language of civilization to justify the power it wields. And it shows that ultimately having superior technology does not equate to moral superiority. In simple terms, might does not make right. My biggest disappointment with the book was the pace. You expect most of the book to focus on the trial and Mia trying to survive on the planet, but roughly 2/3 take place on a spaceship, with the final third set on the planet. And the ending has a twist I appreciated, but I think the opening could have been trimmed to give the ending more room to breathe. Overall, it's not a bad book, its themes are still relevant, but the pacing is a bit slow and I just don't think it's especially engaging. 1969, The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin won. This won the Hugo and the Nebula. I've already done a series where I reviewed all the Hugo winners, so for books I've covered before, I'm going to keep my reviews a bit shorter for these. The book takes place on the planet Winter, where the inhabitants are humanoid and gender is fluid. Genly arrives as a human envoy attempting to persuade a nation on the planet to join an interstellar alliance, but his mission is complicated by political tension and deep cultural misunderstanding. And my favorite aspect of the book is Le Guin uses gender to explore cross-cultural misunderstanding, where intentions and meanings are easily misread between societies. If you haven't read Le Guin, I highly recommend her work. This or The Dispossessed are a bit denser in terms of themes. If you want something lighter or want to ease yourself into a writing, you could try The Hanish Cycle, which leans more into traditional sci-fi, or if you prefer fantasy, you could start with her Earthsea series. Overall, I think Rite of Passage and the Einstein intersection are skippable. I don't think they've really held up for a modern audience. Rite of Passage have some themes that still hold up, but I think it's just a bit slow and not exactly a thrilling read. The Einstein intersection is not very approachable for most readers. If you do want to read Delaney, Babel 17 is a better place to start. Dune, Flowers for Algernon, and The Left Hand of Darkness are the three that really still hold up. I recommend all three. Of course, books are subjective. If you agree or disagree with anything, feel free to comment below. I'm reading through all the Nebula winners and we'll be making a video for each decade. If you enjoyed the video or want to follow along, please like and subscribe.